That's Enough Outta You podcast is sponsored by Todd John's Law. Unfortunately, bad things happen to good people, whether it's the result of an auto accident caused by the carelessness of another driver or being charged with a crime. Dealing with the aftermath of a personal injury accident or being involved with the criminal justice system can be extremely difficult. That's why, whatever you're facing, you should never go it alone. You need an experienced attorney who will stand by you every step of the way. Todd is experienced, licensed, trusted, respected, and guaranteed. No one will work harder or more diligently on your behalf, and he will personally handle your case from beginning to end. Located on Drinker Street in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, Todd has been representing the legal rights of Scranton and Wilkes-Barre personal injury victims and those accused of a crime for over 20 years. At Todd John's Law, the utmost priority is ensuring that your rights are always protected and that your case is resolved as quickly and fairly as possible so that you can move on with your life. Call Todd John's Law at 570-876-6903. With Todd John's Law, you will receive equal justice under the law. All right, welcome to That's Enough Outta You. I am your host, Bill Rader, and joining me is my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, how's it going?
Billy Graves, what's up, buddy?
Doing pretty good. I am excited about our guest today and our topic. So let's, why don't we get started?
Yeah, we got a great one today. And before we introduce him, I just want to say this is going to be an important episode because it's following, last week we had Don Mcgovern on and we really took apart Mark Shaw's book and a lot of the disinformation with Marilyn Monroe. And tonight we're going to talk about, JFK and all the alleged womanizing that just gets so exaggerated and taken to such an outrageous level in the media and in social media. And there's so many ridiculous things that's floating around the internet. Like there's one quote here by Caitlin Flanagan from The Atlantic, and she was asked, how many affairs do you think JFK had when he was in office? And she said, well, if he wasn't in the Wilt Chamberlain area, he wasn't that far off, which is, implicating that, Wilt said he was with like 20,000 women, which is just so ridiculous. And there's all different kind of, outrageous rumors, and they bring the mob into it and Castro plots and all this other stuff. So tonight, we wanted to bring, Jim DiEugenio on, and he's joining us from Los Angeles to clear up some of this kind of stuff. So how you doing tonight, Jim?
Not too bad.
All right. Well, if you want to just, give an opening statement, Jim, on what they do with this, the exaggeration on this stuff. And, if something checks out, it checks out, but they take it to such an outrageous level. And then I like to get into some of the specifics on this, with we could start with Judith Extner and go from there.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm really glad you guys had Don Mcgovern on. Okay. I think I more or less discovered him for the JFK community.
Right.
All right. It was almost by accident. I was just going through some Marilyn Monroe books on Amazon, and I saw his. All right. And he was having trouble getting that book distributed. And because he had gone the self-publication route. All right. And he was having problems with, I think it was Lulu. All right. And I said, well, look, can you please send me a copy? And because I'd like to read it. All right. And so he did. And then we had him on Leno Sanik's show two or three times. And there's, to my point of view, there's nobody better on that subject than Don Mcgovern.
Oh, we agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had Don on a few times, and he's been great every time. He really, really debunks a lot of that garbage about Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedys and the alleged affairs and Bobby, had something to do with her death. I mean, all that garbage. And he does a great job in just kind of going through the facts and the fact that there's no evidence for any of that stuff. So
see what his book does See and the same thing applies to who we're going to talk about today, Exner and Mary Meyer. What his book shows is that a very, very small sample, you know, uh, of a relationship. Kennedy's enemies built this into a literally a mountain of
Right.
intrigue. Okay,
Hmm.
and they've managed to turn Marilyn Monroe into well, let's see. There's a the KGB, the FBI, the
CIA.
CIA. Okay,
The mob.
she she's at these meetings in Washington talking about
Busy.
you know
He's very busy.
mongoose.
Yeah.
She's
UFOs.
she's sex bait for Castro in the
Oh
Castro
God.
plot. You know, I mean, it's just it's absolutely insane. What these people have done. You know, and I believe it's the and a big problem is that crappy book Double Cross. Okay, that was released in the wake of JFK.
Terrible book.
Which actually said that Giancana owned Marilyn Monroe's contract,
Right.
which is something that excuse me, that Don McGovern specifically took up in his book to show that it was absolutely false. Okay, you know, so that's what the importance of Don McGovern's book is. Okay, and like I said, I don't think there's hardly anybody better on that. Now, many years ago, back in the 90s, I was provoked to get into this field by the controversy surrounding the whole Seymour Hersh, ABC, Marilyn Monroe. There was supposed to have been Hersh had sold his book to ABC based upon one of the silliest ideas I've ever heard of, that somehow Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedy family had signed a trust agreement. I'm sure you're aware of this, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we are.
And the agreement was based upon she had knowledge of how Kennedy was cavorting around with these mobsters and having an affair with her at the same time. She would shut up in return for her taking care of her mother, who was in a sanitarium, I believe, down in Florida. Okay, at that time. All right, for I think $600,000, which would be about 6 million today. All right, and I thought that whole idea was just so preposterous that nobody could take it seriously. But there was this guy, Lex Cusack, in New York, who had forged these papers, and Hirsch had not had them forensically tested, even though he got a lot of money for his book. He had not forensically tested the documents. Okay, which means you send them to a typewriter expert, you send them to a paper and ink expert, that kind of thing. All right. But Hirsch didn't even bother to look to see if zip codes were being used at that time, because they weren't. But they were in these documents, and that was a dead giveaway. But it later turned out by both the typewriter test and the pen and ink test, okay, that they were forgeries. So when that happened, I began to think, maybe I should take a look at these other things. Okay. And so that's how I got interested in looking at the whole Exner thing and the whole thing about Mary Meyer, thinking that maybe maybe the same thing was being done, in these two cases. All right. So Exner wrote a book called My Story. All right. Um, which I believe was around 1973 or something like that. All right. And then she claimed that she had this affair with John F. Kennedy. Okay. Uh, I don't remember how many times she said that they met. I think it was 2 or 3 times. And so she signed a contract with Scott Meredith, that was one of the big literary agencies at that time. And she made for that time a pretty decent amount of money. I think about 150, $170,000. Okay. Which again, if we translated it to today, is probably about 700 or 800 grand. All right. And so that was that. All right. And everybody thought, well, that's the last we're ever going to hear of Judy Extner. No, it was not. It was not. Because several years later, I believe at the 25th anniversary, 1988, lo and behold, she sells a story to People magazine. All right. And now she says, if you can believe it, she forgot to include this, but she was actually a messenger service between the White House and Sam Giancana in Chicago, because she had known Giancana also. I believe she also said she knew Rosselli. All right.
Yeah.
All right. And so now the cover story on People magazine says words of the effect, messenger for the mob. Okay. I thought this was so unbelievable. Okay, because on so many counts. Okay, that it was preposterous right on its face. All right. For example, as the church committee had shown, and the church committee was in 1975. All right. So this was 13 years later. The Kennedys had no knowledge of the CIA mafia plots to kill Castro.
Right.
All right. So how the heck would they be involved with this? And if they and if we actually take this at its face, all right, wouldn't Giancana and Rosselli say words of the effect, Judy, we don't need these communications because we're working with Bob Mayhew.
Right. Because it didn't start under Kennedy.
Right. And well, in fact, the Kennedys had nothing to do with it.
No.
All right. And so wouldn't they say that we're working with Bob Mayhew, okay, on this project with the CIA? We don't need, these messages back and forth. All right. Okay. And but then it went even further. It then said that somehow, some way, that she was also carrying funds, okay? And these funds were to be used in the West Virginia primary, okay, and in Chicago for the election. All right. Now, again, I'm very puzzled by this. The idea that Joe Kennedy, who was worth at that time hundreds of millions of dollars, okay, would have to use Sam Giancana to buy the election for his son in a state as small as West Virginia, okay, I thought was just utterly ridiculous. All right. I mean, Bobby Kennedy was JFK's manager. All right. I would say Bobby Kennedy did a heck of a job, okay, in organizing West Virginia. And I decided to read a couple of books on this. All right. And one of them was from a volunteer worker who worked in that campaign. And the other one was from a union guy, okay, who was involved in that West Virginia campaign. All right. The union guy said that this is what happened. he was going to go ahead and endorse Humphrey. Jack Kennedy asked for a meeting. Okay. And he said, look, whatever Humphrey is going to offer you, I will give you more. Okay. And then I promise you, once I win, okay, and I think I can, I don't think Humphrey can win, okay, I will call you into my office in the White House, and you can go ahead and present me with a wish list of what you want for your constituents and the state. Okay. And he said that convinced him to switch sides. All right. And so he asked him then, how much money do you think you're going to need to win your district? And he said 35. And he said, fine, we'll get you the money. He meant 3,500. Okay. When the plane landed to bring in the money for him to win his district, it was 35,000. Okay. And so he said, there's no way I could use 35,000 in my district. So I spent the whole next 2 days driving around West Virginia, giving money to the district managers in these other areas, you know, for get out the vote drives, to hire escorts for people who couldn't get to the polls, to hand out flyers, you know, at the voting headquarters, etc. So that's what happened. That's, you know, so this idea that you needed Sam Giancana to do that kind of stuff with all the money that Joseph Kennedy had, you know, is preposterous. Now, the other book, this guy did a more academic study of West Virginia. All right. And he went through all the investigations that were held, okay, after the election. Okay, because the Republicans wanted to see if there was anything. Okay. There was one by the Attorney General. There was one by the local DA. There was one by Barry Goldwater in the Senate. Okay. Nobody ever turned up, okay, any evidence of skullduggery. And this guy interviewed something like 80 people. Okay. And he said, look, I drove around the whole state. I talked to everybody involved. You know, nobody recalls anything about any aides to Sam Giancana, okay, being in the state at that time. Okay, so this ended up being a dry well. Okay, nobody, you know. And by the way, these two books were not easy to find. Okay, I had to drive all over LA to find them. Okay, you know, because good books on this are always ignored. Everybody reads Double Cross. Right. All right. So then there was also an academic study by a guy named John Binder, who I think was a university professor in Chicago. Okay. And he studied all of the wards that were supposed to be controlled by Giancana in the 1960 general election. And in studying the voting results, he came up with the opposite conclusion, that the actual turnout in those wards that voted for Kennedy was less than the Democratic turnout in other years, you know, which indicated to him that not only did the outfit not pump in their influence, but they were hesitant to do so. And he chalks this up to Bobby Kennedy's performance on the Rackets Committee in the Senate in the 1950s, that's why they were reluctant to do so.
Right.
All right. Because Bobby Kennedy actually called Giancana before the Senate committee that he was working on and gave him a very bad time. All right.
Yeah.
And this was before he was Attorney General.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So this idea about Exner being a messenger with the plots to kill Castro, or messaging back and forth, this is nothing but pure bunk. Okay. And this was something, and by the way, the person who was supposed to write this article with Exner was none other than Kitty Kelly. Okay. Um, the queen of pulp fiction,
Right.
or whatever you
Yep.
want to call it. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, guess what? Doing some research on this, Kitty Kelly never wrote the article. And the reason she never wrote the article is that her and Exner did not get along. Okay. To put it mildly. All right. And so what happened is, it was the editors at Time Life who went ahead and penned the article. Now, I don't have to tell you what the people at Time Life, okay, what the editors at Time Life did in the Kennedy case, you know. But
Of
that's
course.
who actually wrote the article, all right? Because they had invested a lot of money in this. Okay, I think it was a total of $100,000 for a magazine article, all right? Okay, and so they were not going to see that investment go down the drain. So that's what happened. All right. That's what happened. All right. Now, Exner, at the end of that article, of the People magazine article, she writes words to the effect that I did what I did, and I wrote this because I'm dying, and I want the truth about what I did for John F. Kennedy to come out before I die. Okay. So everybody expected, well, she's probably going to die in the next year or two for cancer, etc. Well, that wasn't the case. Okay. Not by a long shot. Okay. All right. In fact, about 10 years later, she's still around. All right. And she writes another article, this time with Liz Smith, another pulp fiction artist. And this one was in Vanity Fair. And it was in the January 1997 article. And again, she's facing her death. So I get, this has been going on now for 10 years. Okay, she's facing her death. Okay. And this time, um, she says that she actually had been impregnated by uh, JFK. And,
Unbelievable.
all right, and this time Bobby Kennedy's now involved with this messaging. Okay. All right. Now, what makes this so bizarre is that in her book, she actually specifically denied that this had happened in her book. Let me read it. In 1977, in her book, Exner stated that there was no abortion, that this was a canard made up by the FBI in order to harass her. In fact, it's the one scene in the book that has emotional force. Consider this for yourself. And this is, I'm quoting from the book. A what? I yelled, speaking to them for the first time since the day they had broken into my apartment. You people are insane. I didn't have an abortion. How dare you walk in here and accuse me of that? Get out of this room right now. Then she says, I could have killed that man. I should have on the spot. There is nothing heinous about having an abortion today, but in 1963, my God, it was a sin of the century. They knew precisely what they were doing when they falsely accused me of something like that. Now that is from her book, which
Wow.
I said I believe is 1973. Now, 20 some years later, this is what she writes. Okay, in her article for Vanity Fair. So Jack said, "Do you think Sam would help us? Would you ask Sam? Would you mind asking?" I was surprised, but I said I'd ask. So I called Sam and we had dinner. I told him what I needed. He blew sky high. Damn him. Damn that Kennedy. He loved to be theatrical, and he always enjoyed picking on Jack. This, again, first of all, there's a problem of her denying it, which, by the way, is never acknowledged in the Vanity Fair article. Okay, Liz Smith never said, well, wait a minute, why did you say this back then? But now you're completely because, of course, Liz Smith was an accomplice on this.
Well, Liz Smith is a gossip columnist, right? Isn't
right?
That?
Exactly. Yeah. That's what she was.
Right, which is what this is. This is gossip. Yeah. This is not news. You know, this isn't fact or history. Just gossip.
The other thing that I found so crazy about this, okay, about that whole scene. All right, and let me read what I wrote. Smith was so carried away by that cute, cuddly Italian mobster that she never bothered to ponder the fact that zillionaires in America have always had quiet, discreet ways to solve such personal problems. How about a private jet to a secretive clinic in Switzerland? All right. They don't need mafia chieftains to help them, especially one with 6 FBI agents following him around, ready to squeal on Kennedy the minute Hoover wants them to. See, and now this is the other thing that's completely left out.
Right.
By this time, RFK and the FBI had total surveillance on Giancana.
Right.
Everywhere he went. And I'm not exaggerating. They had, by following his routine around, they had wiretapped all of his meeting places. They not only had that, they would follow him by car.
It was driving him crazy.
They would actually park their car in front of his house at night.
Right.
Okay. All right. When he would go to a restaurant, they would take the table next to Sam. Okay. When he would go to the bathroom, they would get up and take the urinal next to Sam Giancana. Okay. If he was on the golf course, they would be on the foursome right behind Giancana. Okay. All right. So the idea that somehow, some way, the FBI would not know about this is absolutely preposterous, you know? But
It's
this
ridiculous.
is the kind of thing that was allowed, okay, be this sensationalism without checking any basis in fact, you know, that the mainstream media got away with at that time. All right. Okay. And now another contradiction. She said that somehow that Bobby Kennedy was knowledgeable about this messaging, okay, and that he somehow met her, I believe, at the White House or some other political function and asked her about it, okay. In fact, here it is. You know, I used to be at the White House having lunch or dinner with Jack, and Bobby would often come by. He'd squeeze my shoulders solicitously and ask, Judy, are you okay carrying those messages for us to Chicago? Do you still feel comfortable doing it? Okay? The problem with this is that, and I think it's on YouTube, Larry King had asked her about this specific question. And she actually had said, I don't believe I ever met Bobby.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Okay. I don't believe it. She goes, he might have been at some political rally that I was also in attendance. But see, and this is what happens here. See, these people tell so many lies that they can't keep track of all the lies that
Right.
they're telling.
Yep.
Okay. And so
Exactly.
every once in a while, something like this happens, you know, and of course, the people in the MSM, you know, nobody says anything about it because nobody bothers to look it up. Okay. Or on the other hand, you know, they don't care because, you know, they'll go with the Pulp Fiction, okay, instead.
But
All
Jim,
right.
let me ask you this, Jim. I have a question here. Why do you think like so many people inside the JFK research community that are good researchers? Why do you think they buy some of this crap? Like some of them go along with the Exner stuff and the Joe Kennedy mob stuff, and I think it's frustrating when you hear them just not really look into it, but just go along with it and buy it that the Kennedys were tied to the mob and they buy the Marilyn Monroe stuff and I don't know if you can answer that, but it's really frustrating when some of them do inside the community that are good researchers.
Well, I think there's two reasons. First of all, if you had an agenda in your orientation to the JFK case that you were hitting on the mafia angle, okay, then this would be an advantage to your kind of thinking, you know, that this would help bolster your case. All right. Secondly, a lot of people in the JFK field, you know, um, simply did not want to do the extra work, okay, of checking what to them might have been, you know, a fait accompli, okay, or something that's tangentially related. All right. Like I said, I had to drive all over LA to find these books. Okay. I finally found them at Cal State LA, you know, which is about 25 miles from where I live. Okay. Where I found those two books. All right. And the reason that I did that, okay, was simply because, you know, I just found that if something was going to like this going to happen in the Marilyn Monroe case, maybe it had happened already and everybody had overlooked it. Okay, you know, uh, but and by the way, when you said good researchers, if you can believe it, John Newman fell for Exner.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
Yep.
and I wrote about that in one of my reviews of his several books. Okay, you know, and when I actually met with John up in where was it, Gary Aguilar's house in San Francisco, I actually told him, I go, you didn't do your homework on Exner. Okay, you know, so um, those are a couple of and of course, people like the late John Davis, okay, and people like
Oh
Blakey,
yeah,
yeah,
Davis
you
is
know,
terrible.
yeah, because they're oriented to this angle, okay, they would go ahead and want to accept it.
Right.
All right. But, you know, and by the way, I think I was the only one. I think I am. I was. You know, I just called that book Double Cross. Double Cross is not a book, it's a novel.
Right.
Okay. That's what it is.
Made up.
Yes. Okay. If you fact check that book,
It's terrible.
for example, as to the plots to kill Castro, the timing is completely all off. They even have Exner at one of these meetings, which is one of the most crazy, insane things I've ever heard of in my life. Okay. You know?
Well, Jim,
Uh,
even the mob stuff in that is wrong. Like they have Al Capone behind the Torrio hits when everybody knows it was Bugs Moran. Like they didn't even get the mob stuff right. All the mob stuff is wrong.
right.
That whole book is like fiction.
Yes. I totally agree. And I believe that if you take a look at the timing, you know, that book came out, I believe, in late 1992. All right. Clearly, it was because of the
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 movie.
controversy over Oliver Stone's
Right.
film JFK.
Yep.
They decided to take advantage of that, Okay. And the mainstream media. Now, I don't know if you remember this. I thought this was incredible. When that book came out, cable TV went ape. They started doing segments,
Yep.
okay, based on that book.
Yeah, I
And
remember that.
actually reading parts of the book
Yeah,
as
Unbelievable.
if it was true.
right.
Okay. Never doing. Now, to my way of thinking, when you have see, at Kennedy's and King, we don't have a big budget. We have kind of a poor man's budget. Okay. So we're labor intensive. Okay. We can't hire students out of college or something. Okay. But you would think with the kind of money that these cable TV companies have, that one of the big honchos there would say, spend a couple of days at the library and tell me if this book checks out on the CIA mafia plots to kill Castro. Okay? Just take a really bright graduate student, tell them what sources to look up, okay, and come back to me and give me a report. Nobody did that.
Well, what they do, Jim, is they go and they ask people, what would you rather see on television? A story about, exactly, because it's
Yep,
sexier to
exactly.
see, it's
It
sexier
sells.
to see that the mob got him elected and that he was involved, all these salacious and that's what they do. It's like you said, Pulp Fiction. It's one of these Quentin Tarantino
You
movies.
throw Marilyn Monroe in, you got big money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
whether or not it's true doesn't matter.
No.
And see, the thing is, and we'll get to Mary Meyer in a minute. Okay. The thing is, what this does in reality, and I'm actually going to write a long article about this later. Okay. Is that it leads to a whole distortion and a whole character smear of everybody involved. Okay. And it creates lower standards in our culture. Marilyn Monroe was not a mafia mall. Okay. She was not a KGB agent. She was not an FBI informant. She was not a CIA agent. She was none of those things. Okay. She was kind of a lost young girl, who was trying to be a good actress. And all that gets thrown by the wayside in this mad, almost insane campaign, to make her into something that she was not, that is actually laughable on its face,
Right.
Okay. But that is what our culture, has become on these subjects. Okay. Now, I wrote my article about Mary Meyer, and this was all incorporated into one. And by the way, this was one of the most famous articles I ever wrote for Probe magazine. It was called The Posthumous Assassination of John F. Kennedy. Okay.
Right.
And I wrote my article before Peter Janney's book came out. Okay. And I later heard about Peter Janney's book through Lisa Peace. And then me and her wrote a 2-part review of Peter Janney's book, which you can see online. All right. Now, again, the background on this. Mary Meyer had been married to Cord Meyer. Okay. Cord Meyer eventually became a CIA officer. Okay. Specializing in propaganda. Okay. And he had been a young idealist working for the World Federalists until, according to him, and I read his book on this called Facing Reality, he decided that he had been rather naive about having a kind of one world government. Okay. And then he had switched and he had become an anti-Soviet propagandist working for Allen Dulles in the CIA. Okay. Now, he had been married to Mary Meyer for a number of years. Okay. They divorced. All right. And a very interesting angle that has to be emphasized is that Mary is married to this CIA guy. Her sister, Tony, was married to Ben Bradley, who is one of the upper level guys at the Washington Post. Now, the thing that is interesting about this is that Bradley has been accused by more than one writer of having ties to the CIA. Okay? All right? And this made for an interesting nexus. All right? There's also another connection, is that Bradley was friends with John F. Kennedy. Okay? So in other words, at some of these functions, for example, the first birthday party that Jackie Kennedy had, which was on board a yacht, I think, for JFK when he was president, because Tony came and Ben, Mary Meyer tagged along. Okay? You know? And by the way, she was invited by Jackie. All right? Okay? And so this confluence of this led to a lot of rumors. Okay? And today I don't think there's very much doubt that, as with Marilyn Monroe, JFK probably did have some kind of sexual liaison with Mary Meyer. But this is what created the whole after death mystery, which is going to be built upon, by people like Janney later on. In 1964, Mary Meyer was killed in a attack on what was called at that time the towpath, okay, running along, a river in Washington. All right. This was about, I'd say like 3 months after Kennedy was killed. All right. And the guy who had been accused of the attack, all right, was eventually found not guilty. All right. And he was defended by a very proficient lawyer named Dovey Roundtree. Okay. All right. The fact that he was acquitted, all right, all right, his name was Ray Crump, okay, this opened up the door, okay, so to speak.
Right.
It was actually more like a chasm, from an earthquake, okay, that this opened it up for all kinds of wild speculation.
Right.
About what had really happened to Mary Meyer. Okay. Now, the first guy to do this, all right, was a guy named Jim Truitt. Okay. All right. Jim Truitt had been a friend of Ben Bradley's. All right. And Jim Truitt had been, to put it mildly, let go by Ben Bradley because he had an alcohol problem or something like that. And he was in kind of like a dire straits at the time. In the wake of Bradley becoming a hero in the downfall of Richard Nixon, Uh, Truett got in contact with the National Enquirer and accused Bradley of somehow covering up the death of his sister-in-law. Okay. And I'm pretty sure that National Enquirer article, which I think was 1976, okay, that was the first mention of the so-called diary. Okay. Now, if you study this, you'll understand. I'm sure Don talked about this with you.
Yeah.
That this diary device was then borrowed, I believe. Well, actually, it might have originated with Marilyn Monroe.
Right.
Okay, because supposedly she had a diary.
Yeah, we
Okay.
talked about that.
Okay, right. Which I think that was first mentioned by the serial liar Slatzer.
Yeah.
Okay, in 1974. So, in other words, this might have been borrowed from Marilyn Monroe because the National Enquirer article is 1976. Okay, all right. And so this comes out that somehow she had a secret diary and all of these incredible secrets of her relationship with John F. Kennedy was in this diary, which allegedly disappeared. All right. Okay. Now, because of what Truett did, that opened up the door even wider. Okay. In this whole Mary Meyer case. Okay. And now, this was allowed to venture into, and by the way, I saw the first draft of Peter Janney's book. Okay. Somehow, and he, by the way, he cut back on that first draft. Okay. All right. In my opinion, it was even worse then, okay, than it ended up. All right. So what happened is, if you can believe it, hold on to your hats. Timothy Leary jumped in to the Mary
Yep.
Meyer morass. Okay. And when I say jumped in, I mean feet first. Okay. He now said that JFK's whole journey to peace. I can't even say this stuff without
Unbelievable. It's
laughing.
unbelievable.
His whole journey to peace, going from a Cold Warrior to a peacenik in 1963, this was secretly done by him giving drugs to Mary Meyer.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Okay. All right. And now, again, when I read this, I did one of my usual drives around Los Angeles. Okay. Trying to find where he got this idea. And I went to several different libraries because Timothy Leary got anything he wanted published. Okay. No matter how bad the book was, he got it published. One of them was called High Priest, which was like a daily journal of him on the run from the authorities. And so I found about 20 books that he had published prior to when he first wrote about this. And guess what, guys? Not in one instance did he ever mention Mary Meyer.
Wow.
He had like 20 opportunities,
Mhm.
300 pages a shot, okay, to mention this thing, and he never did. I just found that so unbelievable. Because, look, this striking looking woman walks into your office, okay, and she starts asking you that she's this very important person that I'm trying to turn on. Okay. And I need some drugs to do it. Then, after the assassination, she then comes in and says they had to kill him. He was changing too fast. And somehow you couldn't put two and two together, okay, or write about it for even a paragraph or two in any of your prior books. I think that's BS.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that, and by the way, in this same book that Leary wrote that was called Flashbacks, again, hold on to your hats. In that same book, he said he had an affair with Marilyn Monroe.
Oh boy. Might as well join the list.
Right. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So in other words, this guy was directly connected to the Kennedy assassination, and at the same time, he was sleeping with Marilyn Monroe. So talk about an eventful life, okay? All right. So these are the kind of problems that I began to see in the Mary Meyer case, which got utterly ridiculous when Ron Rosenbaum wrote an article for New Times. He actually said that there was a seance that was held. Again, I'm not kidding. Okay.
Oh my
There was
God.
a seance that was held, okay, in order to finally summon Mary Meyer's spirit to find out what really happened. Okay.
Oof.
Now, here is the whole crux of the matter. And let me, if you don't mind, let me quote from my book. Okay. Jim Truitt, who had started all this, okay, in August of 1961, Truitt had called Bradley and said he had evidence that Kennedy had been previously married before his wedding to Jackie, and that this fact had been covered up. Both Bradley and Truitt pursued the story, but before they printed it, they asked Kennedy about it. He referred them to Pierre Salinger, his press secretary. Salinger had already heard the charge from right-wing commentator Fulton Lewis. He had all his points lined up and proved the story was false. Okay, and this was written about in Ben Bradley's book, Conversations with Kennedy.
And Jim, at that time, that would have been a huge scandal because
You're not kidding.
Yeah, there had never been a president that had been married and divorced before.
Right. See, the thing is, both him, JFK, and the woman in question both denied that it had ever happened. Okay. All right. So so this to me said that Jim Truitt had an agenda, from the beginning. Now, after Truitt was fired by Bradley, he was very bitter about the whole thing and almost inconsolable. All right. And he turned to alcohol and drugs. He actually asked for a job with the CIA, but I think it was Cord Meyer that turned him down. Okay. Now, so in my opinion, I don't think Truitt was a very reliable witness. All right. Now, this whole thing about there being a diary, this got into a feud between Angleton and Ben Bradley. Okay. Because Angleton's wife, Sissy, knew Mary.
Mhm.
Okay. And they had actually gone to things like, concerts and plays together. Okay. All right. And so this whole thing got so out of control, with one side telling one story and then the other side telling another story, that Sissy Angleton actually went ahead and wrote a letter to the LA Times about it. Okay. Contesting all the other previous stories, you know. And so, and they said words to the effect that it wasn't, and by the way, and Bradley agreed with this, that was what was ever found, okay, did not constitute any kind of cache of materials that exposed this long, deep relationship. It was more like an art diary, okay, and that it was really, it might have mentioned President Kennedy once or twice. All right. Okay, now let me quote from the article that they wrote to the LA Times. The letter was from Ann Truitt, Jim Truitt's ex-wife, and Angleton's widow, Cicely. Mary's instructions to Anne had been the diary should be entrusted to Angleton, and that Ann Truitt called for Angleton that night and found him at Bradley's house. Okay. Angleton and Cicely were there because the Bradleys had asked them to come over after Mary's death was discovered. Once Truitt got Angleton on the phone, she told him for the first time about Mary's wishes. At this point, the Angletons, Bradley, another person who was not named, make a search through Mary's house. The diary is not there. The search continued in the garage studio. In this version, several papers and the diary were discovered. Tony Bradley gives it all to Angleton and asks him to burn it. Angleton burns the papers only. He safeguarded the diary. This is in the LA Times. Years later, Tony asked for the diary. Angleton gave it to her. She burned it. And the witness was Ann Truitt. Okay? All right. Now, let me ask you a question. If all this stuff about this secret relationship had been in the hands of James Angleton, Kennedy's bitter enemy, don't you think he would have had it published someplace?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No
Yeah.
doubt.
There would be a market for it.
Right.
Okay. But it wasn't. It was never published. See, the thing is, in when I studied this, Mary Meyer didn't really have a whole lot of interest in the political scene. Okay. Mary Meyer was interested in being an artist. Okay. That's what she wanted to be, a painter. All right. All right. And this whole superstructure of ideas that people like Leo Damore, who was actually working on a book about this, and then Peter Janney, who did write a book about it, simply to me has no substance to it at all. The last thing in the world that JFK needed was some kind of private moose, M-U-S-E, to guide him to a view of the world.
Exactly.
And and Janney's book is very bad on this angle. I mean, really bad. If you saw the long version of Oliver Stone's documentary,
right,
JFK Destiny Betrayed, we did some work on this. JFK didn't need anybody. All right.
No.
He did his own study, and he was inspired by two people. And this was Edmund Gullion and Seymour Topping, the reporter for the New York Times, back in 1951, when he went to Saigon to take a look at what the French Empire was doing there. And they both told him that this whole attempt by France to retake Indochina was not going to work because Ho Chi Minh had fired up the Viet Minh to the point that they would rather die than go back under the yoke of colonialism. And France could never win a war of attrition in Indochina because the home front would not support it. All right. And so Kennedy took this very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, his brother was with them on that trip. And he said this had a very big impact on John F. Kennedy's thinking about the whole situation. And it was at that point that he began making speeches and writing about this topic, you know, and he actually said this battle going on in the third world has nothing to do with communism versus democracy.
Nationalism.
It has everything to do with the desire of those countries to be free and independent
Right.
of any kind of colonialism. He
Mm-hmm.
was the only one talking about this, by the way. Not even Adlai Stevenson was going as far as JFK was. All right. And then all these ideas exploded in his 1957 Algeria speech,
Mm-hmm.
which caused, and I'm not exaggerating very much at all, which caused a national furor. Okay. There was something like 135 editorials about that speech because it was so revolutionary, you know, because he was blasting the administration for giving help to France in this war against Algeria to keep Algeria part of the French Empire. And if you recall, what he says at the end is words to the effect, don't we see a reprise in this doomed war in North Africa with what just happened in the jungles of Southeast Asia? Okay. They did the same thing 3 years ago. We were on the wrong side of history then. Do we want to be on the wrong side of history again? Okay. And he said we should be not helping France. We should be escorting them to the negotiating table.
Right.
We should have two objectives: not to split the French nation apart, because it was splitting apart over this Algeria issue. And secondly, free Africa. Now, you're going to tell me that Mary Meyer wrote that speech? Okay.
It was never a Cold Warrior. I think you did a great job proving that, Jim.
I mean, did he really need Mary Meyer to write that speech
Right.
for him? You know, I don't think so.
No.
You know, by the way, he worked on that speech for a year. Okay. He had Jackie Kennedy translating books for him. Okay. To make sure that he had all the facts straight. All right. So I'm sorry, Peter Janney, but I really don't think, you know, that JFK needed Mary Meyer to give him points about what to write in that revolutionary speech. Okay. You know, and so this is one of the big problems that I had with Peter Janney, along with some of the sources that he used, like a guy named Gregory Douglas, who is, to put it mildly, not a very reliable source.
Right. Which
Okay.
is common with these guys.
Right, exactly. I mean, if you take a look at who Summers used for
Oof.
that horrible book he wrote, Goddess.
Yeah.
I mean, Slatzer, Jeannie Carmen.
Carbon, yeah. Russo
Okay.
too, didn't he? Gianni Russo?
No. That was Shaw.
Okay.
That was Mark
Yeah,
Shaw.
Shaw used him, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But Summers used George Smathers. And if you read what Don Mcgovern wrote about Smathers,
Yeah.
talk about a guy who couldn't keep his story straight.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And see, and this is a big problem I have with these books, you know? All right. So, in my opinion, but let me say this. This has an appeal. This has an innate appeal. Soledad O'Brien did a podcast about this, which I wrote about. Okay. You know, there's other people like David Talbot in his book, Brothers.
Right. Yep.
He took the whole Mary Meyer thing seriously.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, and who knows? You know, I'm kind of worried about Rob Reiner's upcoming podcast because from what I heard, he was working with Soledad O'Brien.
Well.
So, in my opinion, this might have some stuff about Mary Meyer. I hope not. You know, I worked with Rob Reiner. He
Right.
was. This is when he was putting together a docudrama. He had a cable TV deal going. Okay, and I had several meetings with Rob. Okay, about the JFK case. At that time, which was years ago, he was going to base his docudrama series on three books: Jim Douglas's book, Dick Russell's book about Richard Case Nagel, and Gaten Fonzie's book, The Last Investigation. And I was fine. If that's what you're going to base your series on, I'll be glad to help you. Okay. But then that got the guy who was promoting it got fired. Okay. Uh, and by the way, I could have told you that was going to happen. Do you know what the title of that series was inside the studio?
No.
I couldn't believe they did this. American Coup d'etat.
Oh, wow.
I said, my God, you're
Wow.
asking for trouble.
Yeah, there's no way. No way they're allowing that.
You want to turn it down a little? I mean, please. Okay.
Well, Jim, based on the evidence, though, what do we know like about the Mary Meyer murder? Do we think the evidence points towards Ray Crum Jr.?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. There. Yes. There was a book about this. Okay. Which revealed the very, I mean, the problems that Crump had. They were numerous, you know. Uh, and then the fact that there was another guy online who did an investigation who found out that W. Roundtree had created an alibi for Crump. Okay. It wasn't accurate. All right. And so I think that Crump was actually the assailant today. Okay. Um, so, and of course, people don't want to believe that because, you know, it helps them
Doesn't make as
create,
good a story.
right.
Right.
It helps create a legend, and then
Hmm.
with idiots, like Timothy Leary. See, one of the reasons I wrote the book, not the book, but the long essay, was that there had developed in the literature a very strong anti-Kennedy stream. People like John Davis, okay, people like Richard Reeves, people like Thomas Reeves, two separate authors, okay, um, and people like Seymour Hersh. There was this anti-Kent. Now, how this started, I actually speculate about in the essay. All right, but there's no doubt that it was there, and they used these kinds of stories in their books because it was a way of detracting from what Kennedy was actually doing. Okay, which they ignored. You know, all the revolutionary things and reformist things that Kennedy was doing in foreign policy, were mostly ignored. Okay, and this kind of stuff was substituted into it. So it becomes a way, and I think Jim Douglas wrote about this. It becomes a way of doing a magic trick. Okay, you distract the public from what was really going on with these myths that were not really happening. Okay, Jim Douglas, in the notes to his book, he spends a small. He says, "Look, Kennedy likely was cheating on his wife. Okay, but this is used by Kennedy's detractors to build into something that really doesn't exist. Okay, and so I will
Right.
acknowledge this peccadillos. I will not acknowledge the superstructure of ideas built upon them. Okay, and I more or less agree with that.
Well, Jim,
The
they go on to make it, like these to put them into like the Will Chamberlain thing, and it's just like, what about? It's unbelievable. I know but what about some of these other rumors, Jim, like Jayne Mansfield and
Oh, well,
Angie Dickinson?
that's complete crap.
Okay.
By the way, this gets to a guy that we haven't mentioned yet. Maybe Don mentioned him. One of the very worst that there ever was on this, David Heyman. Okay. Did Don
Yeah.
mention this guy?
I think he mentioned the first time we had him on.
David
Yeah.
Heyman was a serial confabulator. Okay. And by the way, I can guarantee you he did this. I know this from a source. He actually collected obituaries of people in the Kennedy circle to make sure they were dead.
Wow.
So he could then use them in his books by making up an interview.
That's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
It's true. That he could then create an interview that he did, saying, and yes, and JFK then went down and met with Jayne Mansfield, something like that, okay, etc. Okay, and he did this continuously, all right, and then later, I think what's his name, David K. Johnston wrote an article about this, that he not only created people, he created whole police departments that didn't exist, okay, and that is how some of the worst stories about the Kennedys, both JFK and Bobby, how these started was through David Heyman, because he got printed and with almost no quality control at all. All right. It was utterly a disgrace, if you ask me, what the media did with this guy. But see, this is one of the things I'm going to write about. How this whole, cottage industry has been such a terrible influence, on cultural standards to this day,
Right.
And see, David Heyman was a very good example of this. The whole idea that his book sold, that made whatever problems with the books negligible. They didn't really matter. They sold. Okay. He even accused Bobby Kennedy of having an affair with Jackie.
Oh my God.
Okay. So, yeah. So a lot of these BS stories, like you mentioned, Jayne Mansfield. Okay.
What about the secretaries, Jim?
Oh, please. Oh, God. Greg Parker did a nice article on that. Okay. These were really two very intelligent, okay, and very good people that worked, for JFK. All right. And what has been done to them, what was the nickname, Fiddle and Faddle or whatever it was?
Fiddle and Faddle, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that was it. Greg did a nice article on that. Okay. And then there was this other woman, this so-called intern. I don't even remember her name. Okay. She came out like 30 years later.
Oh, that was Alfred, Mimi Alfred?
Yeah, Mimi Alfred. And she actually said that Kennedy said better red than dead during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Unbelievable.
And she was sleeping with JFK. Jackie never left the White House during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he wanted her to leave. Okay. But she refused to leave. She said, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die with my children and my husband in the White House. Okay. So you're going to tell me that when he was sleeping with Jackie, Mimi Alfred was on the other side of him?
Unbelievable.
These stories just got ridiculous and outrageous.
Right.
But they were supported by the MSM. And one of the things I wrote about in my essay is how the MSM turned into tabloid TV, okay, under the influence of several people like Geraldo Rivera. And I would also put a marking at the Cy Hirsch debacle with ABC. That was also part of the MSM turning into tabloid television. So let me close with one other. Let me close with one other tangent, which I think is important. When ABC bought the rights to Hirsch's book, The Dark Side of Camelot, not only did Hirsch not do any forensic testing of those documents, ABC bought the book without doing any forensic testing. Let me say that again. They bought the book without forensically testing the documents. It would have been completely within their rights to do so. They could say, look, if we're going to give you 6 or 7 figures, we want to make sure that these documents are for real. So we're willing to spend $10,000 or $20,000 to save us possibly $900,000. Okay, and if you don't give us the documents, we're not going to buy the book. Okay, it was that simple.
Well, not only within their rights, Jim, but it's their responsibility to do that.
Right, I agree. I totally agree. All right. Now, as I said, they ended up being frauds. And in fact, anybody could have seen that by the use of the zip codes. You didn't need to send them to a professional typewriter expert or a pen and ink expert. And let me go even further. If you read Robert Sam Anson's article about this, one of the people whose name was on the documents told Hirsch, that's not my signature. It was Joseph Kennedy's secretary. He said, that's not my signature.
Wow.
No.
Okay. And I never met Marilyn Monroe. And Marilyn Monroe was supposed to have been in the office when these documents were signed. So Hirsch was warned in advance. But see, this anti-Kennedy epidemic had so influenced the media by this time that the common reply was, oh, Kennedy apologist. Oh, Kennedy zealot, etc. Okay. No actual question about, wait, maybe she's telling the truth. Okay. So when these documents blew up in ABC's face, they were stuck with the book. Okay. You know, and so they went ahead and a second explosion occurred. And I don't know if you're aware of this. Hirsch backed Extner.
Yeah.
And Extner said that she was traveling around with this satchel between Washington and Chicago. And she was handed off this satchel, which I assume there was money in, okay, by a guy named Martin Underwood, who had been recruited by Hirsch, I think, through Gus Russo. All right. And so Underwood was supposed to be the backup witness. Guess what? He didn't show up for his filming. Okay. And Peter Jennings said so. Okay. But he repeated the story. Later turned out that the ARB took a deposition from Underwood. And he said under oath, I was never part of this transaction, and I never met Judith Extner. Okay. See, and ABC kept that.
Wow.
From the public. So Hirsch had 2 huge custard pies on it. This guy, I just wrote an article about him called Cy Hirsch Falls on His Face Again and Again and Again. He has become a public joke. Okay. You know, and for ABC to have entrusted him was I think, very bad. It was part of the beginning of the MSM turning into tabloid TV. All right. Oh, so I don't know. If I can come close to what Don Mcgovern did, I'll be happy.
You were fantastic, Jim. You were fantastic. Jim, what was that story you said you wanted to tell about the prostitute?
The what?
The prostitute? You mentioned that you had a story on a prostitute.
Yeah, okay. Let me save that for my article.
Okay.
Okay, because it's very interesting. All right, because it relates to one of the people who Summers relied upon in his book Goddess. Okay, it directly relates to that. Okay, and when I finish that article, I'll be glad to talk to you about it.
Okay.
Okay, it's
Fair enough.
because it relates to a guy. I don't know if Don mentioned him, a guy named Fred Otash.
Yeah, he
Okay,
mentioned them.
okay, yeah. Fred Otash was a private investigator in Los Angeles who Summers used more than once in his book. Okay, along with another guy named Gary Ween, who I did some work on, who was a policeman out in Ventura County. That see, it's looking more and more like half the people that Summers used in that book should have never been used by anybody. Okay, but yet because Summers had a reputation, all right, and because Summers used to work for the BBC, you know, that book got a lot of play, you know, uh, and I think the BBC actually made a documentary about it over in England. All right, okay. So when I write this essay, I'll be going through all this stuff, okay, which I don't think has ever been written about before. Okay, so and I'll be glad to do a show with you at that time.
Well, we look forward to it, Jim.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you
All
so
right, Jim,
much.
thank you. This was fantastic.
Yeah, we appreciate your time. Go enjoy the NFL games.
We know the Packers are on, Jim.
Okay.
Have a good
one.
You.
All right, you too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.